Okay, everybody, welcome to our Sunday 4 p.m. broadcast from Scotland on behalf of the Scottish Palestine Solidarity Campaign. We have had a string of very interesting interviewees who have contributed to our understanding of how to build effective solidarity with the beleaguered people of Palestine. And this week, we're particularly interested in exploring the issue of not just the rise of the hard right, the far right, in countries across Europe, North and South America, and the interesting role of Israel in that phenomenon. But we're interested in drawing conclusions from that. What does that mean for those of us campaigning for effective solidarity, especially today when it seems that Israel's ratcheting up the violent assault on the people of Gaza. So today I'm going to introduce you to two BDS activists from Brazil. One I think you can see, Indra Neiva from Sao Paulo. In a moment I'll introduce her. But someone else who's in Sao Paulo and trying to join us, he can join us by voice, but his camera's acting up for the moment. Gabriel will join us very shortly. He's also speaking to us from Sao Paulo in Brazil, where perhaps it's the same disease, the rise of the far right across Europe and North America, but in Brazil it seems it might be the disease at a higher temperature than in some other places. So, Indra Neiva, welcome to this conversation. I had the pleasure of listening to Indra when she spoke to a meeting at the Scottish Trade Union Congress from Brazil a couple of weeks ago at their annual Congress. And she's introduced us to Gabriel, also a BDS activist, spent several years in Palestine and now active in Sao Paulo. Both of them, of course, under the dark shadow of the new fascistic regime. Indra, while we're waiting for Gabriel, can you tell us, how did Bolsonaro come to power? He was a bit of a joke a year or so ago, you mentioned to the meeting in Glasgow. Can you comment on that?
Yes. The Bolsonaro's election, first of all, it was a rampant corruption that was discovered even before he was elected through WhatsApp. And now we discovered that he was his WhatsApp campaign of fake news and especially devoted for the religious public, the bench of the neo-Pentecostals in government, the bench that supports guns and in the government. Those two benches were the basis for support for Bolsonaro. And so at the second turn for the election, we found out that his WhatsApp message spam campaign was getting to almost a third of the population, like 70 million of people were getting those fake news. And he had a very thorough campaign of markets that was actually developed from Steve Bannon's developed it and helped all his marketeer campaign. And that made him get almost 30 points in few months, because at the beginning of the year, he had no chances at all of winning. And in less than 6 months, through the WhatsApp fake news campaign, and obviously through the illegal imprisonment of Lula, because up to this moment they have no proofs at all of the corruption he's been putting in prison for.
Can you tell people, Indra, a little bit about Lula and the previous government and the jailing of your previous president or prime minister, I think? Can you say a few words about that?
Yeah. So we consider it's a political imprisonment, and that's being made sure through all that's happening. So in 2013, Dilma was our president, and she's from the Labour Party, as Lula is, and that's when the coup began. She was deposed from the government with. Up to this moment, Dilma has no corruption scandal in her back. There is nothing that you can accuse her. So they invented this reason to make a coup because the economy was not doing so well. It was a coup, but of course they made it sound as if there was some financial corruption, but up to this moment nothing was found. And so that's where all the coup begins in 2013 when Dilma was deposed, and the judge Moro, who is the far right in Brazil, considers him a hero because he was the one that put Lula in jail. He even before the court case started, this judge wrote a book on the case and was talking on television. He was doing everything that a judge is not supposed to do. He was like clearly taking a position, and wrote a book saying that Lula was to be in prison because he was corrupt. So from the start, when you had this judge beginning all these cases and taking part, it helped all the judicial process to take Dilma out of the government, and to put, when they saw at the beginning of the year, as soon as they saw that Lula had a very different, he would get elected in the first round. So they found legal ways that were not legal to put Lula in jail. But now the recession is like, inflation is increasing rapidly. Unemployment, it's 4 times bigger than the last year at the same time, and all the politics of Bolsonaro, it's to create a major catastrophe in terms of economy, and people are, in 4 months the economy is going down rapidly, unemployment, poverty. And if you through the 13 years of Labour's Party in government, those are numbers, you can see that we had better employment, we had the economy flowing. And so it's basically a pyramid, like all the Labour's Party years, the 13 years, economy was going up, everything, and now it's just going down. And yes.
Can you say a few words about, I was surprised when you mentioned how large was the Christian fundamentalist aspect of Bolsonaro's support in Brazil. We see this in North America. Is there a comparable phenomenon in Brazil?
Yes, there is. There is just as there is in America, with the Jewish lobby and with the Israeli lobby sending a lot of money for this congregations and this church, the same phenomenon is happening here in Brazil. And for example, the Christian Zionist march in Jerusalem, Brazilians are always like the second or the third biggest population of Christian Zionists in this Christian Zionist march in Jerusalem. And here, for example, the Neo-Pentecostals, well, they believe in this battle for prosperity, and they believe that, for example, the cross of David, all the symbols of Israel, they are sacred. So that's from the beginning is like about the symbols, about salvation. And even like 2 years ago, I was in a supermarket here in Brazil, and I started hearing, "We are the army of Israel. We are," like massive crowd, and it was in a place that I didn't know where it was. I entered in a supermarket. I didn't know well the area. And I was like, what's going on? And it was a neo-Pentecostal church beside the supermarket with thousands of people shouting, "We are the army of Israel." And yes, Israel sends a lot of money for those pastors to go to Israel for free. And there is a lot of money into this equation. So, and as the neo-Pentecostals are the biggest bench in Congress, they have a lot of influence, and they and their arms bench helped Bolsonaro be elected. If it wasn't for their influence, that surely wouldn't be possible.
Leaving aside the huge constituency of Christian fundamentalists, are there any other factors that make Israel important for the extreme right in Brazil? It seems to be important for the extreme right across Europe and for Trump, but are there any other strategic factors apart from the profound irrationality of Christian fundamentalism? Can you comment on that, Indra?
Yes, well, you have all the arms deals, and the Christians, they support this neo-Pentecostals, the Christian Zionists. They're strong supporters of the arming industry here in Brazil, and this new legislation that Bolsonaro approved, that everyone can buy guns. And from the beginning of the year, we have seen I don't know how many up to this day, but we have had massacres in schools. Like once it happened like many years ago. This year we had already had 2, and the increase of violence because people are getting armed. Children, including the massacre that happened here in São Paulo, a month ago. It was a child, a teenager that got a gun and made a massacre in his school. So, and the economy here, we have been going from the 3rd to the 5th along the years of the biggest arms importer of Israel. So they are very connected, those two group of interests. Maybe Gabi can also comment on that. Now he's on.
No, I think we can see him. I think we'll have to hold the fort until Gabriel comes online. My other question was, while Gabriel's getting comfortable, can I just share a couple of minutes of a film called The Lab? It's an Israeli film about the arms trade between Israel and Brazil, and the uses I think it contributes to understanding the relationship between Israel and regimes like India, Brazil, and so on. Perhaps I can show that now. It's only a couple of minutes.
שיטת הנוקאוט הישראלית הפכה לפטנט בינלאומי, ואזורים שונים בעולם לדומים יותר לאזורי העימות עם הפלסטינים. כמה חודשים אחרי שפגשתי את לאו, ביקשתי להתלוות אליו לנסיעת עסקים בברזיל.
Bom dia, como está? Comandante Leo Glesser, como está você? Muy bien. Felicidades por novo posto. Agora se chamam Israel Defense Forces. Ou chamam, mas quem é mais melhor? Ou chamam ou vocês?
Isso aí é igual ao melhor, Maradona ou Pelé, né?
אחת הלקוחות הגדולות של תעשיית הנשק הישראלית היא ברזיל. כוחות המשטרה שלה השתלטו בשנים האחרונות על הפאבלות, שכונות העוני של ריו, ודחקו מהן את סוחרי הסמים. קומפלקס דה אלמו, שהמשטרה השתלטה עליו לאחרונה, מכונה בברזיל רצועת עזה.
I've been in Israel, Tel Aviv, Eilat. I felt Tel Aviv is like Copacabana. It's the same thing.
לאו מוכר למשטרת ברזיל נשק וכלי רכב, ואנשיו מאמנים את קציניה בברזיל ובישראל.
עכשיו אנחנו מתקדמים לאזור שהייתה ההשתלטות. Este era un lugar de control de eles.
Sim, mais à frente.
כן, שהיה בעצם...
bloqueado.
כל זה היה בעצם מחסומים לקראת ההגעה של השטח איפה שהייתה ההשתלטות. עכשיו זה צבא, מה שאתה רואה פה.
Temos uma segunda posição. Tem aqui, é uma segunda posição de comandamento.
Sim.
Que é aquela casa verde.
A Casa Verde.
São meus dois pontos fortes, aqui
E
e a
hay
casa
visión
verde.
directa.
Sim.
Esta posición, esta casa, era casa de una persona que estaba en el narcotráfico.
Sim. É um local, um ponto forte que a gente chama, um local onde se concentram policiais e militares para fazer o controle da área.
Nós tenemos en lugares como Gaza y otros lugares, tenemos exactamente la misma actividad, nos tenemos el mismo sistema.
Welcome, Gabriel. You saw that small part of the film.
Yes, I did.
Indra was speaking about the strategic relationship, partly through arms trade between Brazil and Israel. Would you like to comment on that further, Gabriel?
It's something that has been happening for decades now. It's not something that was just in the last few years. I guess Israel has been promoting itself as a major arms seller in the world, provider of not only arms, but also technical expertise and also training. So it has been for a long time, and it's also part of the, I would say it got it was reinforced after Brazil started to democratize. So when it was becoming, when our problem became more, the issue regarding security with the consequences of the political decisions and actions of the dictatorship in Brazil, there was a huge increase in inequality. And during the democratization process in Brazil, that inequality sort of generated a massive problem regarding violence. And since there was no that repression apparatus, that was the militarism was sort of the dictatorship had a very strong military apparatus to control the population, and then it was removed. It sort of ecloded in the in a sort of very strong surge in violence in the poor areas, especially relating to drug trafficking. And in Brazil sort of imported that model of war on drugs from the United States. So that happens actually across Latin America. It's not just a Brazilian thing. It's also, I think, a Latin American issue. Most of the violence in the world, if you say in terms of street violence, gang violence, it's actually in Latin America. This kind of urban violence related to drug dealings and also police repression is actually quite unproportionately located in Latin America, from Mexico to Brazil, Peru, but mainly some of the countries that are part of the drug trafficking route. So when Brazil started importing that modus operandi of dealing with the violence in the peripheries, it started importing models from the United States and also from Israel. So Israel has sort of created a market for dealing with population outside the direct state control. So So this expertise was important, and a lot of partnerships between between our police and the Israeli sort of defense industry grew during this period, during the last, I would say, 30 years. But Israel has been, in each of their new experience, with each new operation, they get more expert. They get like they get to sell it as tested, you know, as tested in combat, and
there was an Israeli brigadier general called El Kabetz who went to an arms and security fair in New Mexico some years ago. We can easily share the link afterwards, and he was selling his security expertise and materiel. He said Gaza is a great laboratory. We learn a lot from Gaza. So just exactly what you said. So, but can I just ask a question of both of you, of Indra and Gabriel? To what extent, I mean, Israel has a niche market. I was talking before we started to Gabriel about this book. Jeff Halper is going to be one of our guests on the Sunday broadcasts in a few weeks' time. But and he spoke in Scotland about his book, War Against the People, which is very much an analysis of how Israel has carved out a niche market around the world in repression. Now, in Glasgow at the moment, we don't, I mean, I think correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the Brazilian regime or the Indian regime, they rely much more on violence against sections of the population who are living in terrible poverty and can't be won over ideologically to support the system. That's not the same in Britain, but even in Glasgow at the moment, we have an Israeli military surveillance system in the city centre. It's called NICE, N-I-C-E Technologies. It was paid for by the London government. It's piloted in Glasgow, which in the past had a relatively high crime rate. But it has facial recognition, which is no surprise. It has emotional recognition software. So they can recognize emotions of people walking down the street. I guess I'm trying to say that this securitization, Israel selling expertise tested on the people of Gaza, is massive in Brazil and elsewhere, but it's also quite significant in Britain. But perhaps I could ask you two, both my guests, to what extent do you think the axes between Israel and Poland and Brazil and Slovakia and Ukraine, very anti-Semitic regimes quite often, to what extent is that a result of the Palestinian resistance, meaning Israel has to resort to atrocious measures which make it more difficult for its democratic allies in Britain and France and Germany and so on to defend the regime, and therefore Israel moving towards these ultra-right, ultra-nationalist regimes as very, very sound allies for the genocidal violence, we could say, the massive violence. Could you comment on that, Indra, and then Gabriel? You're mute.
Yes, yeah, I just unmuted. Yes, the relations of those far right extreme governments, they are bound. For example, in the last conference, we were talking about Ukraine and Azov battalion in Ukraine, and how this neo-Nazi battalion in the army of Ukraine uses and buys arms from Israel. So I actually know a lawyer in Jerusalem who made a case about so that Israel would stop selling guns to this specific battalion that's openly neo-Nazi.
It's called the Azov Battalion, and it's the army Nazis in the army. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no, thank you. The Azov Battalion, yes. And apparently, as I talked to him months ago, the deal was stopped, but he told me that he found out that was just for the public in general, but he's sure that they continued their arms deals with this specific battalion. So what you can see is this extreme right everywhere connecting, and it's a major victory for the elite. And all the as you were mentioning, the people that will suffer from them, from police violence, the black people in the ghettos, in the favelas, because of all the brainwashing, and also we can talk about clientelism. They work for people who make sure, like the workers, so their employees, they make sure that they're brainwashed. Let's say, like last year in Brazil, when the elections were about to happen, we, like, people were in the streets. We called this turning on votes, because as we were taken aback by Bolsonaro's sudden increase on the polls in few months, we started, like, people started going to the streets and camping in the streets, like, all day, to talk to people, and even actors, musicians, all kind of the artists, all the artistic community and activists in general started stationing in the streets with many times with a table, with coffee in the morning, to offer for the workers going to work for 5 minutes of talk. So they could talk to them for 5 minutes to understand who they would vote and why, and to talk about it, because we wanted people to realize what was happening. And many people that I talked to in the streets, they used to tell me that they were being coerced in their workplaces by the employees to vote, and also they were being made, like, the employees of big fabrics were showing Bolsonaro's videos. And also I heard that a lot. For example, I heard a woman telling me, oh, you know what, I have to be honest with you, I have everything that I have nowadays because of the Labour Party's social policies, because my children, they study in this university because of Lula's social program. I have my house because of this other program. But we need change. And we see in our church every week, she was telling me that throughout the year, last year, in her church, there was this video of Bolsonaro, and the pastor was like, really, there was this huge movement across society, in the churches and in the labor, in many workplaces, that this really brainwashing process that was not only through WhatsApp, but it was a huge scheme of the elite in Brazil with the workers and in the churches, and they are all connected. They are all connected. Brazil with Bolsonaro and this global elite that's investing now on punishing the poor and creating this huge army of people in poverty. And
Thank you. Indra, can I bring in Gabriel here?
Yeah,
Gabriel, can you add your comments to that? But can you also add, Indra shocked a lot of people when she spoke to the meeting in Glasgow a few weeks ago. I chaired it, and I saw people at the back of the room, really excellent trade unionists, left-wingers. They were horrified to learn what Bolsonaro had actually said about women, about black people, and so on. It was so disgusting that even our politicians, who are a pretty nasty bunch in Britain, they wouldn't dare to say that. I think we're losing Gabriel. Has he fallen off his chair? Gabriel, would you like to comment on that and tell us something? Well, has the repression begun to intensify in Brazil yet? Your comments.
Of course, I mean, everything that she told you about what he says, and it's true. He's very, like, he doesn't have any sort of the polishment that you can see in other politicians. Like, he's, it was sort of his branding for a long time. And he probably got a lot of advice on how to use that in his favor in the last few years. So, and how to manipulate that. So in a way, it's not just about what he's saying, but how people around him are all manipulating, are trying to sort of manipulate people into looking at what he says in different ways. But yeah, it echoes a lot with a lot of reactionary sentiments that people have in conservative sentiments and all of that. But in terms of repression, I wouldn't say that in terms of direct repression, it's happening. Of course, they have that intention, I would say, but his government is actually having a lot of internal problems because of this whole issue of being so unprepared to deal with the technical realities of governing and dealing with the massive economical problem. But I would say the repression is actually starting through the economical to the fiscal way. So, for example, they're taking away money for research, for universities, while at the same time promising to give more money to politicians, to maintaining the privileges of part of the clerks in the administration, in the judicial system. They're on their side, military.
Sorry,
so
can I just mention that? Sorry, hello? I do apologize. I wanted to refer to that brilliant journalist that you have in Brazil, Glenn Greenwald.
Yes.
And Glenn Greenwald on The Intercept had a fantastic story a few weeks ago, a couple of months ago, and Indra alluded to it when she spoke to the meeting in Glasgow about the links between the Bolsonaro family and the death and some death squads, some militia who actively murder politicians, and also that Bolsonaro said something about to change Brazil, we have to maybe kill 30,000 people. That has to translate into a different attitude by and I don't think the Brazilian police are well versed in human rights, but surely that attitude from the top of the tree leads to see an increase in criminality by the police. Yes? No?
Yes. I would say that it sort of gave me carte blanche to act on their will. So as I said, in the moment, like I would say direct repression of opinion is not really happening still. I mean, there are indications, but it happened through other ways, through removing money from important institutions. But in that sense, it is already happening because it's not in the terms that is actually directly targeting, but actually giving them, the police, freedom to act without consequences. And that's part of one of Bolsonaro's ministers sort of package. His new policies is a sort of anti-crime policy, which he wants to give much more freedom for police officers to act violently, to kill people without having to respond. And there has been some indication that has increased in terms of violence by police and about the military, because every time there is a scandal relating to police violence or army violence in military interventions, for example, the government doesn't really, it sort of either doesn't comment directly on it or sort of tries to give an excuse for it. So there was a case, was it 2 weeks ago now, of family that was shot by the military. There is this sort of military interventions in favelas where the state was unable to sort of control the situation, so they put the military there, and the military has actually killed a lot of innocent people. And the last case was a guy that was just coming, I think he was just coming home, and he was driving, and they shot 80 times at his car, and he wasn't presenting any threat. And the Minister of Justice, which was Sergio Moro, the same of this anti-crime package, the guy that arrested Lula, he said that it's something that happens. Well, it happens. He didn't actually give any sort of excuses even. He just said that it happens.
Can I once again, can I bring this round? I've got a question here, but I'll paraphrase it. Well, how does Palestine solidarity work relate to the struggle against Bolsonaro in the far right? If we see Bolsonaro's two sons with Mossad and IDF T-shirts, and we see Israel being fairly central to the foreign policy of this regime, how does support for Palestinian freedom integrate with the struggle against this far right regime? Indra, could you come in first, and then Gabriel?
Sure. Actually, we just had a few weeks ago the meeting of the Palestinian Brazilian Federation, and we and I am talking now as a worker from a Palestinian cultural movement organization here in São Paulo. We sent a note, a public note. I can actually send that to you as well in Portuguese and in English to everywhere, condemning this Palestinian Federation meeting, because for the past 12 years, it hasn't done any activity, and it doesn't even, it's like supposedly the biggest Palestinian organization here in São Paulo, FEPAL, and it should talk for the Palestinians and help the community and be the resistance, but it's actually a very normalizing organization. So it doesn't subscribe to the BDS campaign. It doesn't create new cadres of youth. It's basically a normalization. It's with the Fatah government. And so we condemned that because they didn't announce it. They didn't call out for them. So it was basically the Palestinian elite here in Brazil that went to the meeting. And so we have a lot of criticism for this now. And I talk as someone that's an activist in a Palestinian front here in São Paulo, together with all the grassroots movements that also have Palestinians working, and then the BDS from the different universities. We are coming together to create a movement that integrates, that combats complicity of companies, not only the BDS, but all the grassroots movements, the Black people, the landless people, the Palestinian people, because there is a strong solidarity between, for example, the woman living in the ghettos that have their son killed by Israeli arms, and the mothers in Gaza. So we are increasing in that networking, and yes, because as Gabriel mentioned, and this is just like 2 weeks now, Bolsonaro, and I just actually wanted to stress that he cut 30% of a budget that has been forever really low on education. So all public universities in Brazil lost 30% of their budget, and he's starting to say that he wants to finish to stop, that no university will have philosophy, sociology, and the humanities, because they're saying these people, they don't help the country, they don't bring investment. So he's in a blatant attack against humanities and in the universities. And people in universities, they are the ones actually that are leading the youth, that are leading the resistance to this government and to fascists in general, and that we're trying to forge this international solidarity. That I do believe that, for example, yesterday we had a meeting here in Brazil called Marx Anniversary, and we had many panelists from the left, from the landless movement, different organizations talking. And there was in no moment there was this word mentioned, technology. I think it's very important that we started, because I mean, how did Bolsonaro win the election? Through technology, like WhatsApp and all this intelligence that he was cutting information, that he was getting those robots, those machines. They were getting all the information from people on Facebook through these games that you answer things about astrology or whatever. And all this information was being collected. So after all, they could have the message sending, like sending through according to interest. So if this people was younger, if she was 15, a teenager, or older, if she was religious or not. So Bolsonaro's market campaign was being really directed massively through these algorithms that learn who you are, how you think, etc. And I do believe that we have to start thinking to appropriate ourselves through this techno-political tools that we have, like decentralized autonomous organizations, to start creating a different economy, or, you know, we have to, I think this technology is very important for us to integrate more strongly in resistance with the Palestinian struggle, but also with all the struggles that are so interwoven together.
Thanks. We have a similar issue in Britain with a company called Cambridge Analytica and the use of massive social media data to influence elections. Gabriel, would you like to come in? And can I just ask you to make your comments on the same topic, of course, but can I ask you if you would comment on this, that we see in Britain some particular struggles against racism, which are really essential given a government which was driving black people, black citizens back to the Caribbean from the Windrush generation. Racism is a terrible institutional part of our life. But some people, when they talk about the rise of the right, they will mention Ukraine and Slovakia and Poland and Brazil and Trump. They never mention Israel. Israel does not seem to be a key part of the extreme right. It seems to be excluded from that list of infamy. Could you comment on that? Because it seems for example, in Europe, Israel was about to host a meeting in Israel of the so-called Visegrad group of ultranationalist European governments. They fell out with the Poles over an issue of the Holocaust and so on. But Israel was there seen as not just part of the extreme right, but actually a key host for their events. So what would you say to British people who want to talk about the extreme right without including Israel as a key part of that extreme right?
I would say that Israel is basically on the core of this crisis, I would say, of maybe some sort of progressive liberalism, because Israel has been a contradiction in any sort of progressive human rights, international law, view of the world, like a system, because it contradicted by the very nature of its creation, and afterwards through the occupation of West Bank, Gaza, the Golan Heights, temporarily the Sinai. So it actually, part of the contradictions that have sort of been central to the rise of the far right has been the particular situation with Israel. And I would say Israel is a synthesis of, I think, the legacy of colonialism and the way that a system was created over this global division of wealth and labor and strategic strategic negotiations and alliances. So Israel has been in the core of it because it was able to maintain policies that actually are trying to be emulated nowadays by the far right. But it has been able to do that under the guise of being a democratic and being a liberal country with rule of law and etc. But at the same time, it was was able to maintain it through the discourse of the victimization of the Jewish people, which is historical reality, especially for Europe. But it is translated as being as used to legitimize the action of Israel in Palestine, which had nothing to do with the historical legacy of anti-Judaism and anti-Semitism in Europe. And of course, the security, which has become really important after 9/11 specifically. So this sort of right-wing, Islamophobic, this whole idea of a Judean-Christian civilization is it's post-World War II creation. It didn't exist before. I mean, some people might have spoken about it, but it basically puts Israel as the central piece of this sort of Western civilization, which sort of has a special place in the world. It doesn't have anything to do with the poverty in the global South. I mean, it sort of tries to isolate the current issues in the world with the legacy of exploitation and the legacy of wars that were carried out in the West or by the West in other places. So I would say that Israel, it's at the very core of this issue because it is a manifestation of this sort of ideology of trying to sort of protect a privileged group in the world from the rest of the world and maintaining a sort of ethnic, sort of, how can I say it? An ethnic cohesion, which will sort of, in their minds, ease up all the problems. You know, you don't have to actually deal with them if you manage to keep them outside, you know, and you don't have to recognize how the problems in Europe, in other places are connected with the situations in the global South, with the marginalization of groups historically and currently, especially, of course, groups that are of other ethnic origins of the global South, Blacks, people from South Asia, from even East Asia and elsewhere, the Middle East, for example. It creates a narrative that everything is due to our own superiority, and it reinforces that. Israel, to have a sort of legitimacy, has sort of pushed this discourse over the years. And of course, there has been echo in the far right because Israel has been doing what many in the far right wish to do in their countries, but their own liberal institutions, their own democratic institutions don't allow it to be as extreme as Israel has been done without being called an undemocratic country. So Israel has been able to maintain that contradiction, and that contradiction has been sort of increasing over the years. And at the same time, the contradictions internally in the countries in the global North have been also very strong, in a sense that you have an increase in inequality, very big. I mean, there is a huge concentration of wealth. You have, at each time there is a crisis, especially after 2008, 2009, it's the rich that benefit from it in the end. They cause it and then they benefit from it. And so the population is marginalized and is seen as being connected. It's sort of their higher status in the world economically and socially is diminished in comparison to the people, the migrants and the people in the global south. So to call upon this idea of a Western Judeo-Christian civilization, it's also to idealize the past and a situation that actually where the elites were actually giving a little bit more to the people instead of concentrating so much wealth towards themselves.
Okay.
And we see that in Brazil as well.
I'm going to have to cut in because we have one enemy, and sometimes it's Facebook. And sometimes they have a habit of cutting us off before we reach the top of the hour. I don't know why. It's a little bit mysterious. What I'd like to do is ask you both to comment very briefly on when I listen to what Indra was saying about Bolsonaro being a very marginal figure in a very short time ago, and then reaching the apex of the government. It seems that in America or Britain or in Brazil, sometimes the society vomits up all this filth, black racism, hatred of foreigners. It's there in the society, but it doesn't get vomited up until somebody like Trump or Bolsonaro, or we don't know, probably Boris Johnson in Britain. Very briefly, friends, first of all, I want to thank you both very much for joining this conversation and for leading this conversation. But what advice would you think from the experience of Brazil would you offer to Palestine solidarity activists in Britain and in Scotland? We fight for the freedom of Palestine. How do we relate this to the wider danger of the rise of the extreme right? Fairly briefly, Indra first, and then Gabriel, if that's okay.
Well, I think since trying to make it brief, what the Bolsonaro's election has taught us is that what Bolsonaro's election has taught us. That's what I was trying to say. That we, the left in general is being here in Brazil and elsewhere very not organized. And I think that's because basically 100 years ago, we started organizing in the unions, but that process didn't align with the technological progress. And that's their tool to manipulate us, to brainwash the population, to keep gaining force and gaining government. So we need to instrumentalize in this way. And I think, of course, we have to find a language, because people that are doing blockchain, for example, and they're starting to create autonomous, self-managed entities. There are few people that have this technological language. So we have to find a way to communicate that to people in large scale, and how to organize in that way. Because as I mentioned, the BDS campaign goes beyond sympathizing with Palestinians, with the Palestinian struggle. It's about us discovering and building these tools that, with technology, technical, political tools, blockchain, etc., to be more organized to fight what's happening. Because what we understood here from last election is that we're totally unprepared. Like, things are happening and we can't even react because it happens so suddenly that a year ago never imagined that we would have a fascist government in Brazil. That was not, well, and it was not imaginable because we were not being prepared, because we are all you're not acting together. And that what happened after the election is that now we have this consciousness that we need to organize, that there's no time to lose. We need the grassroots movements, need this cohesion, and we're trying to find ways to articulate internationally. If they, as we say, if they make the irrationality and the bestiality global, we have to internationalize the resistance and to keep finding new tools.
Thank you, Indra. Thank you very much. I think I would agree with every single word. Gabriel, would you like to say a few words finally to the audience?
There is a sound now. Okay.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, I guess the issue that I think I don't have much to say about what Indra said. I think there needs to be a good. I think the movements need to be in touch with the reality of the public, of the margins, and of the lower classes, of the working classes, and try to mobilize together to try to find a common sense. And also, I think there needs to be a caution in the way we prioritize certain issues. I guess what happened in Brazil is that part of the left was sort of fragmented. So I think what it has to be done, that even where there isn't a complete consensus, there should be at least coordinated actions. So even if there is divisions and different points of view, at least coordinate efforts towards the same goal, and not try to divide as much, because I would say the campaign, the way Bolsonaro won was not just because everyone is a fanatic of Bolsonaro, or everyone was a right wing, but there was a common goal, and that common goal was to take away PT from the party, from power. Was the goal of sort of changing the reality economically in order to benefit the few in this crisis, because we're living through a crisis. And the rich don't want to get less rich; they want to continue getting rich. So, a way to make the poor pay for it is to sort of ally with these groups and try to put the target towards something else, so that they can feel that they have achieved something, even if they're losing. So there needs to be a conscience about that.
Friends, Indra and Gabriel, I want to thank you both very much on behalf of all the people viewing and listening. Your experience is really important for us, but we will hopefully keep in touch. We will demonstrate solidarity. One of our speakers last week is on trial in Berlin with one Palestinian and 2 Israeli anti-Zionists for BDS activities. They're on trial in Berlin. I raised with them the possibility that on a specific day, we could help them by protesting when they next go to court, by going to the German embassy or the German consulate to let people in Germany know that the world is watching, that they're not alone. Because it's very hard in Brazil, it's also hard in Germany to stand up for Palestinian rights. And these guys are doing so. Friends, thanks very much again. It's a real pleasure. I forgot to introduce both of you in terms of all your skills and talents and history. I will do that afterwards because we have to end the meeting now. So Indra and Gabriel in Sao Paulo, thank you again very much for joining us.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Michael.
Friends, I want you, the photograph behind me is of a meeting in Glasgow. There's an Israeli diplomat and an Israeli minister who attended the workshop in Glasgow, together with all sorts of Christian fundamentalists, these two here, who are leading the pro-Israel crowd in Scotland. And they had the workshop to discuss how to fight the BDS movement. They have deep pockets thanks to the link to the minister and the embassy, and they're fighting back in a coordinated way. They may hate each other, but they work together against us. And I think the Palestine solidarity movement has to take a leaf from what Indra and Gabriel have said, what some of us have been saying for a very long time. We have to work together in a strategic and in a coordinated way while Gaza is being bombed and starved and houses bulldozed, and our government continues to sell sniper rifle parts to the Israeli army. So friends, we can carry on this conversation in writing, commenting afterwards, but I have to say thank you very much to everybody, and goodbye.
Goodbye.
I don't know how to say goodbye in Portuguese. Sorry.
Ciao.
Ciao, ciao.
You're cheating. That's Italian. Ciao.
It's similar.